Today's video is sponsored by Saily, of whom more in a bit. Hello everyone. Before we begin, I have a little confession to make. This video, dealing with the RTV1 Hovertrain, was made 2 weeks ago. 2 days before it was due to go live, something happened that changed everything. I'll let you know what that was at the appropriate point. Suffice it to say that my inability to predict the future has, once again, caused me strife. As everyone knows, monorails are the future. I mean, they must be. People have been telling us that they are for over 100 years now. But what's more futuristic than a monorail? How about a monorail that hovers? If you've ever travelled up the East Coast Main Line, you might have spotted something weird just outside Peterborough. This is officially known as RTV31. It's over 50 years old, and it's Britain's first hovertrain. And it actually worked very well. So why aren't we all whizzing around in hovering trains? The thinking in 1960s Britain was this. Railways were viewed in many quarters as a spent force. The British rail network had largely been built in the 19th century, and it had reached its limit. Air travel was obviously the future, but airports had to be built out of town, London City Airport notwithstanding. High-speed rail was one possibility, like the Shinkansen in Japan, but there were those in the fields of engineering who felt that this was a golden opportunity to try something completely new, a form of transport that could connect airports and cities, or replace long-distance travel, requiring less infrastructure than a conventional railway. Enter the tracked hovercraft. A hovercraft works by generating a cushion of air beneath itself, which means that it can travel on both land and water. It can't get bogged down in mud or snarled up in weeds. But it operates with highest efficiency on a smooth surface. Now, you'll have to bear with me on this. I'm not an engineer or hover guy. But in theory, a hovercraft with a smooth track could be more energy efficient than a train. A train loses energy to friction against the rails, particularly at high speed or when the rails are poorly maintained. A tracked hovercraft does not have these problems. Hovercraft Development Limited played with this concept in the early 1960s. The technology of travel is ever evolving, but it's not just the big things that count. Sometimes the little things can make all the difference, like your phone. And that's where Saily, who have kindly sponsored this video, come into the picture. Travelling abroad can be a real hassle, finding your passport, figuring out whether 12 sets of underwear is enough for a 3-day trip, you know the sort of thing. One thing you don't need to worry about anymore is staying connected abroad. With Saily, you don't need to rack up enormous roaming charges or have to find public Wi-Fi every time you need to go online. Saily is an eSIM that gives you data wherever you go, no hassle, no faff. The way it works is this. You download the app, and by the way, Saily works on any phone that supports eSIM technology, so that includes iOS and Android. Then you buy a plan. There are multiple plans in over 200 destinations at excellent rates. You can even get regional or global plans for you fast-moving whiz kids. Once you've picked your plan, you install the eSIM, and as soon as you arrive at your destination, you'll be automatically connected to the local network. It gets better though. They have a special offer for viewers of this channel. Get 15% off on Saily eSIM data plans. Download the app and use the code JAGO at the checkout. Or, if you'd prefer, you can visit the link in the description, or use this QR code for the same. We may not have hovertrains, but Saily will have you walking on air. Back to the video. But what really turned this from a vague idea into a serious proposition was another invention. The linear induction motor, invented by Eric Laithwaite at the University of Manchester in 1961. Once again, I'm not an engineer, so I am grossly simplifying here, but basically a conventional electric motor uses magnetism to generate a spinning motion. A linear induction motor generates motion kind of lengthways. In the case of a rail vehicle, the motor generates a magnetic pulse along its length. You magnetize the rail with the opposite polarity. This means that the two opposing magnetic forces repel each other, and the motor pushes itself along. It was a match made in heaven. Most forms of motive power rely on contact with the ground, and one thing a hovercraft ipso facto cannot do is contact the ground. That's why they're usually fitted with propellers. They need to employ aircraft principles. But the linear induction motor is, if anything, more efficient when it doesn't touch the ground. A new organisation was formed in 1967, Tracked Hovercraft Limited. Eric Laithwaite joined the company that year, having failed to interest British Rail in his invention. Now, governments tend to be reluctant to shell out lots of money for theoretical transport schemes, and the tracked hovercraft was certainly no exception. However, there was a very specific circumstance at play here, and researching this video actually solves a mystery for me. At this time, there was a big question mark over Heathrow Airport. Namely, how do you get people between central London and Heathrow? Roads were slow and increasingly congested. The favoured proposal was for a tube connection from Hounslow, which actually got built, or a mainline connection from Feltham. There was a proposal for a rather unconventional monorail that would have turned into a bus once it reached the airport. But in Hansard, the minister mentions a second monorail. He does not specify what that is. But there are several references around the RTV31 to building a hover track to Heathrow. So I think that mystery is solved. Also, hovertrack isn't a real word, I just made it up to make me sound smarter than I am. But there was another fortunate external factor, namely that over in France they were also working on tracked hovercraft, and this encouraged the government to actually put some money behind this thing. If it was going to fail, it would be a British failure, dash it all. Over the summer of '69, many of the fine details were ironed out, like should the motor operate on 2 planes, either side of the beam, or 1 on top. They decided on 1 for simplicity, and because it would be cheap. The fact that the whole thing looks like a monorail was again for simplicity's sake. The simpler everything is, the easier it is to align it all, and the easier it is to maintain it. A 3-mile concrete test track was constructed in Cambridgeshire at Erith under the supervision of EWH Gifford and Partners engineers. According to this advert, it was supplied by Shepherd Hill and Company, who were obviously quite optimistic for the prospects of this thing. It was constructed on somewhat marshy ground, prone to high winds, which sounds like a terrible idea, but you have to bear in mind that these engineers wanted to see how the thing would actually work in the real world, not to present a false impression of how good the thing was. If they couldn't make it work on this kind of ground, there was no way it would get from London to Edinburgh. The full track was supposed to be 20 miles long, which would allow the vehicle to really show its paces. But again, practicality was the order of the day. The hope was that on this 3-mile test track, the vehicle would perform well enough to justify paying for the rest. The test vehicle was constructed, RTV31. That's what this vehicle is. It was pretty basic on the outside. Those windows on the side are just painted on, and it never wore them under test. On the inside, though, it contained a wealth of sophisticated instrumentation supplied by the British Aircraft Corporation to feed test data back to the engineering team in real time. Oh, and of course it contains that great big linear induction motor, a joint venture between English Electric and GEC. On the 7th of February 1973, in front of a crowd of journalists and a government representative, RTV31 was trialled. Over a distance of 1 mile, it achieved a speed of 104 miles per hour. A complete success. The only way it could have gone better was if it had a longer track. The engineers were confident that it could have achieved 250 or even 300 miles an hour on the 20-mile track. Not only were the engineers pleased, but the report by MP Michael McNair Wilson seemingly convinced Aerospace Minister Michael Heseltine that the project had legs. If I were an employee of Tracked Hovercraft Limited, I'd at least have been putting the champagne on ice. And yet, a month later, the project was cancelled. Would it surprise you to learn that it came down to politics? Probably not. You see, while all this was going on, another project was underway, the Advanced Passenger Train. The concept of the APT was, simply, a high-speed train that used a tilting mechanism to take curves at higher speeds than a conventional train. This would have problems of its own, but it seemed like a simpler, and importantly cheaper, solution to the problem. It would use existing rail infrastructure. whereas the tracked hovercraft would need an entire new track built for it, which would likely take years, if not decades. Tracked Hovercraft Limited believed they could have one in service by the 80s, but that wasn't quick enough. Well, as it happened, the APT concept didn't quite work out either, and the solution arrived at was just faster trains. But the tracked hovercraft wasn't a total waste of time and money. Laithwaite turned his attention to the maglev concept. In some ways, you could describe this as cutting out the middleman. A maglev train uses magnetic repulsion both to push it along and to lift it off the track. It's a simpler way of doing things than a tracked hovercraft. The world's first public maglev system opened at Birmingham International Airport in 1984. So the tracked hovercraft's track was mostly removed. There are a few concrete blocks still in place to mystify ramblers. RTV-31 was sent to Cranfield University, and then in 1996 it was saved from scrap by former staff of Tracked Hovercraft Limited and went to Railworld in Peterborough, where it is today. There's also a Birmingham maglev vehicle here if you want to see the sequel. The RTV-31 was a noble failure. It's not that the concept was a bad one, or that it didn't work, it just wasn't as practical as other solutions to the problem. Maglevs seem to have been slow to catch on as well, with the first intercity maglevs only now under construction. In France they opted for the TGV, and in Britain we only just seem to have started taking high-speed rail seriously in the last couple of decades. And even then it's liable to be cancelled on the whim of short-sighted politicians. As for RTV-31, its future is as precarious as it's ever been. The beam has been found to be structurally unsound, and the vehicle itself is likely not much better. There was a GoFundMe last year which was closed down a considerable distance from its final goal, and I'm not clear what's happening now. Will the RTV-31 continue to baffle passengers passing through Peterborough, or is it doomed to fall apart? I guess it's up in the air. Hi, it's Jago from 2 days ago again. Well, we do know the answer. Since I made this video, the process of dismantling the vehicle has begun. I understand the plan is to investigate how salvageable it is. I'm afraid I don't have any more details at present. But yes, by the time this video goes live, the RTV-31 is presumably in pieces. This hovercraft is well and truly beached. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. My main source for this was the Railway Executive International from spring to summer 72. I must also acknowledge another YouTuber who has recently covered this, Luke O'Sullivan, whose video popped up literally as I was finishing the script for this. My initial reaction was to curse my bad luck, but his video is actually really good and far more thorough than this one, so I will link it below. You should definitely go and watch it. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the linear induction motor to my tracked hovercraft. Thanks also to Saily for sponsoring this video. Check out the link in the description below to take advantage of their offer. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.